Hi, welcome to the second episode of the Comics Coffee Metal podcast. I'm your host, Don Cardenas, and this week I have Tyrell Cannon. Tyrell is the creator of the comic books Victus, Simon. He's one of the driving forces behind the multiple successful Kickstarters for the anthology Speculative Relationships. He has an amazing illustration series called In the Name of Metal. He has created covers and pinups for Dark Horse, Image, and Heavy Metal Comics, and he is currently working on a sci-fi series called Eris, which is available at his Patreon. Tyrell, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Don. Good to be here, man. It's going well. Just
awesome.
Normal day, drawing and goofing off, listening to metal.
The best days.
Yeah.
So, as is the name of the podcast, I have to ask, comics, coffee, metal. What were your first experiences with each of those, if you care to expound?
Oh, man. So coffee is probably the earliest. Well, I don't know. Comics and coffee were probably both the youngest age things for me, because whenever I think of coffee, like the earliest memory I have of it is my dad would drink coffee in the mornings, and on Sunday mornings sometimes we would drink coffee with him. And so that was the first time I ever got into coffee. Was when he finally let us start drinking coffee with him, and I felt so cool drinking coffee with my dad, because oh, dad's an adult, he's like my hero, and he's drinking coffee, so I'm drinking coffee too.
Awesome.
And I always wanted to put the same amount of if he was putting sugar and cream in, I always just did the exact same amount that he did. And even now when I go home to visit my folks, I love having a cup of coffee with my dad. So that was probably my earliest experience. And the comics, similarly, my dad got me comics when I was maybe in fourth grade. For Christmas, I got some comics. I think it was an issue of Incredible Hulk and an issue of G.I. Joe. And then he took me to the comic book store for the first time. And so, that was when I was probably like fourth or fifth grade. He took me to the comic store down the street, and I bought some X-Force and X-Men comics. And then metal, probably junior high. I think one of the first CDs I ever bought was the Black Album, Metallica's Black Album.
Nice.
So that was like one of my first, metal experiences. And I think it was because I saw like Enter Sandman on MTV or something. And at that time, for some reason, that connected with, I don't know, I was like, this is so cool. This sounds awesome.
Awesome.
So yeah, that was probably my earliest with all those.
Yeah. I had a feeling for people around our age, X-Force, X-Men, and the Black Album.
Yep. Pretty much.
Are pretty heavy gateways into this life.
Yeah.
Something I've always admired about your artwork is that you're really great at creating the feeling of like how metal sounds into an image. You've done these fantastic Doom pinups from the video game that just, I can just hear just gnarly guitars and wailing and blast beats behind them. And your In the Name of Metal series is just always awesome to see, and it always invokes such great feelings when I see these images. Like, I can hear what you're trying to get across. Can you expound on the creation of that?
Yeah.
Series?
Well, for the series for In the Name of Metal, it's a series I'm doing, I guess, kind of casually doing now, where I take sort of an idea for a metal band name, and then I try to illustrate what I think that their album would look like, and kind of consequently kind of what their sound might sort of be like. And I don't know, I think the original idea just probably came from sitting around with my friends, and I think, like a lot of metalheads, one of our favorite things to do is just like think of band names, oh, that'd be a cool band name. And I just started writing down a lot of band names and coming up with some of my own. And then another thing that kind of I was thinking about when I started the project was that, growing up pre-internet, or, pre-ubiquitous internet, when you went to a record store or, to buy CDs and stuff, a lot of times all you had to go on was the cool artwork.
Yeah.
Like you could, if you picked up a Cannibal Corpse CD, you kind of knew what they sounded like by looking at that image. And I really think that's really cool and exciting. And so it was kind of a way for me to play around with the idea of visualizing a sound or a theme that a band might have, and trying to kind of also kind of push myself to try new things, just kind of have an umbrella to try new things under. So I don't work in color as much, this will be a good opportunity to just play with some color. Or, maybe finding a way to show a different band's sound by using a different style that's maybe not, my primary way of working. So like some of them might be, more quiet scenes of priests and stuff hanging out, and then other ones might be like a monster on fire.
Mhm.
Um, and just kind of pushing myself to try, different things and really, really just dig into that. And then as I'm working on it, a lot of times I will put on music that I think is maybe similar to the band,
Okay.
or look at reference images from that, some bands that I like. So maybe if I'm working on like the last one I did, I kind of wanted it to sound like I wanted the album artwork to look sort of like a Pennywise album mixed with like a KMFDM album, with like some Unsane. And so I was like listening to those bands while I was
That's a
doing
mix.
it. Yeah, yeah. Like just something wacky and crazy that nobody's heard before. And so yeah, I was just trying to think of like, you know, as I'm listening to it, like what are the kind of shapes of these sounds? Um, and one of them that comes back a lot is maybe like thinking about sound effects in comics too, is like this idea of Kerrang,
Yeah, yeah.
like I feel like that's when I hear Kerrang or see Kerrang, it's almost like that's I don't know, it's like that's a shape or a feeling I could get, in line work. It's kind of jagged, but it's kind of heavy, but then it's also kind of sharp. I don't
Yeah.
know if that makes any sense.
That makes perfect sense to me. As someone who, makes metal music and also draws, I'm, you know, ecstatic whenever I see your series get a new entry, but I'm also insanely envious because when I try to do that type of thing, it's just like it's not coming through me in that way.
Mm,
So,
mm, mm. You
so
mean
that's
as you're drawing or as you're playing?
as I'm drawing, because
Okay.
if I've tried to have do some illustrations where um, I haven't tried recently, but where I'm trying to like create an album type cover or just something different that's not comics. Um,
Yeah.
it it tends to not it tends to fall a little flat to me.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
that's
Hmm.
why
Hmm.
whenever I see yours, I'm like, damn, he gets it. Like, and
Well, thanks, man.
that's just kind of the fun and the pain of being an artist. I think is when you see people doing the things you can't, but they're so tied into what something else you do, and it's fun. So when I say I'm
Yeah.
envious, it's not definitely not a, a jealous. It's just more like oh Tyrell, you did it
Yeah.
again.
Well, and I have to say I feel the same way. I'll look at, I always feel like I'm still reaching for something that I haven't
Yeah,
yet attained. I think that's sort of the eternal curse of a lot of artists. I think that
yeah,
as soon as you're drawing in a way that you feel like you totally get it and you understand it and you can reproduce it easily, I think your work starts to look dead.
hmm,
Like there's a lot of artists I think that do just kind of fall into a way of working and they're
yeah,
no longer growing or changing. And I think that that's when I stop having an interest. But yeah, I mean, when I'm trying to do these metal posters too, it's like I'm looking at this art by these guys like Eric Roper and like these, Dave Clock and these guys that do these amazing posters. And I'm just like, oh, I wish I could, capture that. And so a lot of it is staying hungry for me, but the other part of it is I'll literally just look at what they're doing and really try to study it. Like I'll look at it and I'll have that initial reaction of like, oh, that's, so tough, or that's so fast, or that's so whatever the feeling is I'm getting. And then I'm like, well, what is he, how is he making that happen? And like really look at it like like you're like when you're in language arts class in high school, you have to like break apart poetry, like how does this work, why does it sound so beautiful? It's kind of like that, like
yeah.
how is this guy making these kind of lines, or what colors is he using, that kind of stuff. What are the page layouts, the designs he's using? Because yeah, man, it's hard. It's like I always feel like I'm also just like trying to get better, like all the time.
Well, there's something that this kind of leads into that I've long considered uh, asking you whenever we've seen each other around or we've tabled together at conventions. You seem to be really effective at illustration as a whole, like as a single piece, and also really into telling stories comic wise. Is there sort of when you're approaching a comic page versus an illustration, you have to get into a different mindset, or is that more of a it just kind of comes from the same place, it just ends up different on the page?
That's a good question. I think they come from similar places in that you're trying to, get a feeling across or tell a story within the confines of some kind of parameters. So with a single illustration, it's like that's all there is. So you've got composition, you've got color, you've got line quality, you've got subject matter, you've got all those things. In a comic, you also have pages and panels and the actual book size and design. So in a way, the comics it's more to think about. But I think what that does is that it makes each piece of a comic a little, it's more cumulative. So, there are times in a comic where you can kind of have a panel that maybe isn't perfect or that isn't telling a whole story just in a panel, but it's accumulation of the images on the pages kind of put together an overall feeling. Whereas with an illustration or like with a commission, I've been doing a lot of commissions lately. It's like, I feel like I'm going back to those like so many times to get it just perfect, because it's got to be like, that's all people are going to see. And you want them, like the difference too is that with a comic, I don't necessarily like think people need to understand a comic panel. Like a lot of people talk about comics should read quickly. I don't know if I'm 100% in that direction, but it is a thing where you read in sequence. Yeah. Whereas with an illustration, you need to pull people in and have them stay there for a longer time on one image. And also you want them to have a reason to come back to it. Yeah. Whereas with a comic, you want all those things too, but you want them to continue going. Whereas with an illustration, you want them to stop and stay. So those are the kind of the two different ways I think about it. And I think I obsess a lot more over an illustration, a singular piece working, just because I know that when that's done, it's done. Yeah. Whereas with a comic, I can be like, well, that panel kind of sucks, but this panel right next to it is awesome.
The next page.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. That's interesting. You bring up I've heard that come up before where people say, a comic kind of needs to read quick, which I'm like, that is kind of asinine. Like I think
I don't like that.
It needs to read effectively. It needs to read cleanly. But I think anyone who speak to any artist, their favorite comics are the ones where you can linger on a page and you discover things.
Yeah. And absolutely.
It's easier to do that when the storytelling is clear and effective and very clean, not just a huge mess of lines that looks cool.
Yeah.
I.e. the 90s, for the most part.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to see the different takes on, you want an illustration to be something people focus in on and stay there and linger and come back to, because it ultimately just becomes one. It is the piece, as opposed to a comic being a piece of a larger puzzle, no matter what.
Right.
Because the panel is a part of the page, which is a part of this all the pages.
Right.
One book, which is part of 3, 4, 5 issues of the storyline.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, and I think the tricky thing is that there's probably more to think about as a creator when you're making a comic. Like I do think it's more challenging in the sense that, there's a lot of interconnected parts, and especially if you're working on something that continues through time, you have so much to think about. Whereas the nice thing about an illustration piece, when I do a singular illustration or a commission, is that when it's done, it's done. And like, I don't have to worry about linking up with something later or referencing it again somewhere else. Mm-hmm. Whereas every time I draw, say, a background in a comic and it's going to be the background of some character's spaceship, I'm like, okay, do I want to draw this same background every time the spaceship shows up or not? And is it going to work in the different kinds of scenes that I want to tell? And so it just totally puts your brain through the ringer. And I think most of us screw up that all the time. You're like, I forgot that this had to be this way, and you got to find ways to fudge it and stuff. But yeah, it's a different kind of challenge.
Yeah, 90% of the times, if you mess up one detail of something you're constantly repeating, no one's gonna. And if someone does,
they're a nerd.
they can take a long walk off a short pier.
Yeah, right. Yeah. They can kick rocks.
So I've noticed uh, a theme you keep coming back to in your work besides metal is sci-fi.
Yeah.
Now, is that something you just naturally gravitate to, or is it just, luck of the draw that the stories that you've come up with that people have asked you to do are sci-fi related? And after that, is there a genre that you haven't really touched on yet that you're kind of really wanting to get into?
Um, I think I've always had an interest in science fiction. Like I probably before I was even probably into comics proper, I was watching science fiction movies and monster movies, especially horror and all that. And I think that it's still the genre I'm most drawn to. I like the way it gives you good sci-fi really just gives you a new context to look at some current situation. And I think that that's why it makes it so much more relevant to me than something that is maybe just taking place in the modern day, or in current situation. Not that those movies can't be good. I mean, I like all kinds of movies, but I'm totally a sucker, totally a mark for sci-fi. I mean, if a sci-fi movie comes out, I'm more likely to check it out than a non-sci-fi movie. And I think that just by default makes a lot of my ideas kind of go down that road. And then I think that I continue to get those opportunities because they say like dress for the job you want. And it's like,
Yeah.
so if all I'm drawing is sci-fi and metal, hopefully those are the people that hire me.
Yeah.
So, every time I get asked to draw something for somebody, a lot of times it's going to be, science fiction related or comic action superhero related. So yeah, so I think that that's probably, a big part of it. What was the second part of your question?
I was asking if there's a particular genre that you haven't really explored yet, aside from sci-fi, that
Right.
you really want to kind of, dig your art teeth into.
Man, so many. I would like to do everything, but I finally actually did dip a little bit into some auto bio stuff with my last Inktober, and that's a genre I've always never like. I've always been kind of averse to, but doing that exercise I think was really it made me feel like, oh, maybe I could do something that's rewarding for myself in this. Another one that I would really like to do is horror, because I am a big horror movie buff and I love horror movies. And same thing with Western. I would love to do a Western.
Oh, Western.
Yeah, I actually wrote a comic pitch that was sort of a Western. It was set in like the 1800s, like turn of the century there. And I wasn't drawing it. I had hired another guy to draw it, but it was so much fun to work in that sort of world of the Wild West America. And that's just, I think that's a great genre that there's not a lot of great Western comics out right now. And there's not a lot of great horror comics out right now. I think horror is really, really hard to do in comics.
Oh,
and
yeah,
so
definitely.
I think that would be a fun challenge, growing up with that kind of stuff and getting a chance to do a horror comic. So those are the two main ones. But I mean, honestly, I'd do anything. I mean, the way I dipped my toe in romance was to do the sci-fi romance anthology. but yeah, I think horror, Western. If anybody wants to do a horror Western, hit me up.
Or Westerns, the new zombies.
Man, if I could just do like a Bone Tomahawk type comic, I would be so happy.
I always want to watch that movie again, but I usually end up split on that decision.
That's good. I like that.
Wah, wah. Anyway, so right now you're currently working on a sci-fi series on your Patreon called Eris.
Yeah.
I am ashamed to say I haven't really checked it out yet. I haven't had a chance to sit down and log into the Patreon and check it out though. But could you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah. So Eris is a new comic kind of series, I guess, I'm working on with my brother. So my younger brother and I actually, he co-wrote the Western I was just talking about with me, and he's worked on a couple mini comics. He did a couple Simon mini comics with me, and he's more of a writer than me. So I kind of was like, well, it'd be nice to have somebody who can maybe handle dialogue a little better than me, and somebody who can help, develop my, kind of nonsense ideas into something a little more like solid. So anyway, we're writing it together, and I'm drawing it, and it's the basic idea is that it's sort of a far off future, no real date determined, and the whole world is kind of together, but under the rule of this group called the Archon Circle, which is sort of, if all the bankers and politicians and and the 1% type people kind of eventually fused into this hive mind. They would become the Archon Circle, and they kind of rule everybody else, and everybody's sort of in a kind of a socialist prison state kind of a deal. Anyway, working for them is the Eris Vanguard, which is sort of the main characters of the book, and they're a sort of enforcer slash military ranger type team that works for the Archon Circle. And they've been tasked to go to the edge of the universe to find this rogue operative named Bosch, who found the source of this substance called Root, which is the substance that the Archon Circle uses to control the masses. It kind of promotes docility and kind of a shared consciousness among the masses. So they want to find this rogue agent who has the source that's disappeared. So they want to send these guys out to go get this person, kill them, and bring the source back so they can maintain their control on Earth. So it's kind of about the team going on this journey, and how one of the team members, Jubal, who's the kind of the newest team member, sort of starts to have a different view on the violence they're putting onto other people that they come across, and debating whether or not the Archon Circle is the right way to run the world. And then at the end, he's going to be confronted with that decision of what to do.
Sounds awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little complicated, I guess, but it's the main thing is that it's these kind of super powered naked guys in space, beating the hell out of people. So there's a lot of action.
It's not that complicated at all.
It's kind of it's sort of based in superhero comics and sci-fi, but also in things like Heart of Darkness, that kind of stuff.
No, it's interesting. You said it sounds complicated, but all the stuff you mentioned, that's world building. That's ultimately towards the end, you've kind of told us what the theme of the book is about, this team going after this thing that ultimately we can objectively say is not good. Thing to be happening, and will they grow from this experience? Will they learn from this experience? It's kind of funny that you bring up the name Archon Circle, because bringing it back to metal real quick, one of the more popular metal amps right now is the Paul Reed Smith Archon amp.
Nice.
So you're so metal, you're metal when you don't know it.
That makes me very happy, because I want the names of things to sound metal, and to sound like sci-fi metal. I
don't know the nature of the name Archon, so it could just be naturally heavy sounding thing, but that's pretty funny. So what kind of metal have you been listening to lately, or not metal?
Well, I still I listen to a lot of things, but metal. The two things on my rotation the most is metal and hip hop. So as far as metal right now, I've over the last few years still been on a really big sort of doom metal and stoner metal kind of kick. So this last year, the new Sleep album, The Sciences, was really great. Yob's last record, the last two records were phenomenal. Paul Bearer, they didn't come out with one this year, but their last three records have been just amazing. I listen to a lot of Ohm, and I listen to High on Fire, so the other two bands by the guys from Sleep. And then I just was getting into this band recently called Oranzi Pazuzu. Have you heard of them before?
I've seen the name around.
Yeah,
somewhere.
It's sort of experimental black metal.
Okay. It might have been from you talking about it. I'm not sure.
Yeah. So they're it's really heavy, but it's kind of weird. So yeah, I listen to kind of that style, but I've gotten into a few faster bands recently. One of my friends got me hooked on Vector.
Oh, okay. Yeah, they're great.
Been loving Vector lately. And then this kind of throwback band called Eternal Champion. They do sort of kind of 80s throwbackish metal that it's all they dress like barbarians and stuff. It's pretty rad stuff. Lots of guitar solos and
back to Manowar.
Yeah, totally. So they're great. And then for hip hop, I still am stuck in 90s New York backpack hip hop. I listen to Cannibal Ox once a month, I think, and then Run the Jewels. I love Run the Jewels. They're incredible. Anything LP produces is great. And then that last Tribe Called Quest album has been in heavy rotation lately. So, but yeah, I mean, a lot of everything, but slow, heavy, dark metal is really,
Nice.
really the main thing. Yeah. What have you been listening to lately?
Well, it's been pretty wild up and down for me lately because if anyone follows the channel that this is on, I've been doing heavy metal covers, and so
Yeah.
it's been kind of jumping up and down, and I got some non-metal things becoming metal. So I've been listening to a lot of that. But if I looked at my iTunes, played most from last year, it's just going to be all Gojira and Tegan and Sarah.
Nice.
So
I actually like Tegan and Sarah. They're pretty
they're
good.
awesome. They are
Yeah.
awesome. They are going through their albums. I've kind of likened them to like the Metallica of their genre because they've changed
Interesting.
style like album to album to album, and they do what they do really well. And
So you're saying
some
I should listen to them until they have like a Load or a Saint Anger? Is that?
hey, Load was the album that got me into metal. So
Load was all right. Load was all right.
um though
Saint Anger, though, I
I
can't
did
hang
own the Black album before I owned Load, but that's a story. Um
with.
but so, a band I've been really into lately, I wasn't into before, but they had a new album this year. It's called Amaranth, and they
Oh
are
yeah,
kind
yeah, yeah.
they're kind of it's three singers, a clean male singer, a screamer, and a female singer. And their latest album is very kind of like the pinnacle of what they do, where it's heavy riffs, a lot of like electronic influence, even a little dubstep here and there. The screamer guy is like getting almost rapping. My wife calls it scrapping because he's screaming and kind of rapping, and some of the flow of it and the lyrical contents almost like hip hop. Um, and that's been really excellent. But I've been really looking forward to the new Dream Theater album that's coming out, and Evergrey, and something Patrick Brower and I talked about last episode was kind of he thought that Slayer is kind of like the if you put a pin in the entire genre of metal, like Slayer is dead middle, and that's kind of like where most people start and then branch out. And I stated that I believe it's more like the big four, Anthrax, Slayer, Megadeth, Metallica. Usually, if you throw a rock at a metalhead, most likely one of their first bands is one of those four.
Oh,
And
you cut
then,
out there right at the end.
oh, if you throw a rock at a metalhead,
Oh,
the most likely one of their
can't hear you
first
now.
bands. Uh oh, I have trouble.
Let me see. Is my volume?
Can you hear me all right now?
Oh, now I can
There
hear
we go.
you.
Okay.
Oh,
Basically, I was saying that most metalheads, I think, start with either Metallica, Slayer, Megadeth, or Anthrax, and then they kind of like
yeah.
branch out from there. Um, and that I think the genre of metal has become so big, it's almost its own medium.
Right,
Because
right.
Patrick, he's very much hair metal, little power metal type stuff, and you mentioned you like the heavier, slower doom stuff, and there's this giant Venn diagram where like
Yeah.
some of us overlap, some of us don't, because I definitely like stuff like the Sword and Sleep and Pallbearer and all that, but I also like some of the stuff, power metal stuff that Patrick likes and things like that. But
Right.
it's all so different. But it's all just metal.
I think I think there's more crossover now too than there used to be. I
Oh
think
yeah,
that probably back when some of the subgenres were forming, there seemed to be a lot of like antagonism between them.
yeah, yeah.
But like I don't think it's weird now that like I like Sleep, but I also like Megadeth.
Hmm.
I like Iron Maiden, but I also like High on Fire. I think
Yeah,
that maybe it's just the availability of the music is better, and like you don't have to save up your dollars to buy one album and then defend it as the best album.
definitely,
Like
definitely.
people can just listen to everything. Whereas if you're going to spend your money on something, I think by default you feel like you have to sort of defend that decision.
Yeah, yeah,
So back when I could only buy one album, every 5 or 6 months, I'd be like, oh no, Slipknot's the best metal band ever, and here's why. I had to like tell people. So
yeah. I think the explosion of streaming media has really benefited metal. I think the most
yeah,
because
yeah,
um, I think metalheads tend to be the most open-minded with trying a new band. Like even if
yeah,
it's just like, oh, the guitar player from the band I love was wearing this dude's shirt. I can take 5 minutes later, I see this entire album band's catalog in front of me. I can scroll through it till I find the song I dig, and then it
Right.
just goes from there. That's what happened
Right.
with me in Gojira, and because everyone was talking about Gojira is this amazing band, and for years and years, and I'm like I couldn't really get into it, and then all of a sudden one day I heard the song Silvera, and I'm like I'm in, and then I've just
Yeah.
gone back and just devoured everything they've listened to, and
Right.
it's
Right.
just, but it's not something I would have listened to in 2005 when that album came, when one of those albums came out, or things like that.
Right. Yeah, the way we engage with music is so different now, you know. The other thing that I think is different too for me that like wasn't the same before is that, before you listen to music when you were actively saying, I'm going to listen to this album, or
Mm-hmm.
in your car, or maybe on your headphones when you're on a plane or a bus or something. But now, like, people listen to it at their job, in their office. I listen to it all day while I'm
Yeah,
drawing. And so there's more, I'm more hungry for content because I'm consuming it at a
yeah,
higher rate.
definitely.
And so it's not a big deal for me, since it's free, to just check out a band's whole album and just listen to the whole album. Whereas
Yeah.
before, I feel like I would get into bands via mixtapes and mix CDs that people would make
Mm-hmm.
me. So they'd pick that one great song, and then maybe I would check out the band, maybe I wouldn't. But now I can just be like, well, I might not like it, but I'll try a whole album and then see how I feel about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I try not to talk too much about my own stuff here, but I do have this story of in the early 2000s where I was talking to a guy who just loved all metal. This is before any streaming media, any iTunes, anything like this. And he's like, "Oh, I'll burn you a few CDs of these bands I like." The next week, we go in college. We come to class. He hands me 27 CDs, all handwritten notes with
Yep.
the
Yep.
songs and all that. And I'm like, "Dude, like, you want some money for these?" He's like, "No, no, man. I make like 3 copies of every CD." Like, he showed me a picture of his room, and it's like he buys a CD, he burns like 3 copies of it, and writes the notes of that, and puts the original one like on his wall, like wallpaper. And
That's
I'm like,
awesome.
and I'm like thinking like people aren't going to be doing that kind of stuff anymore. Like now with
Yeah.
vinyl
Yeah.
coming back and things like that, that kind of music appreciation level is coming back. I think. Not to
Yeah.
say that
Right.
people who
I think
stream
that,
stuff don't appreciate it,
yeah,
but
sorry.
um, I was gonna ask, like, during the day, like, is it some days you just need silence to work, or is it you ever sit down and say, you know what, I really like this band. Here's a new thing they did. I kind of want to consume it on its own grounds, not while I'm doing something else. Have you ever just leaned into doing anything like that? Because that's something I've been heavily considering, as some of these
Well,
bands
like,
I've really grown
yeah,
to enjoy put out new things. Or is it, I don't have time for that. I need to have it on, but I want to listen to it, but I also got to work.
I think a lot of what's lost that you're hitting on there is like this idea that like of collector culture or whatever. I mean, we still see it in comics a little bit, but like when people they get into something and they want to not just like have it, they want to have everything all about it. They want to memorialize it. They want to have backup copies of it. And I think that the problem with the media being so much easier to consume now is that it's more disposable.
Yeah.
So collecting is different now. Like I remember back even when like Napster and LimeWire were a thing, people were bragging like about how many things, how many gigs of music they had,
Yeah.
And I feel like now nobody even thinks about that. They're just like, well, yeah, I have a membership to Spotify. I just listen to whatever I want. And there's not that like curation that happens. In a way, it can be bad. In a way, it can be good that people are more open to hearing new things. But I think it's harder for people to maybe fall in love with things the way they used to. Because when you're stuck with it and living with it, like this guy's room that's full of all these CDs,
Yeah.
by default, his love of that music just grows, exponentially every day that he spends in there. Yeah.
Have you jumped onto the vinyl kick? Have you gotten into that, or is that just something
No,
that hasn't grabbed you, or are you like me, where it's
no.
like I can't get into this right now, because I would go way too far into it, so I just need to not do this.
That's probably a good way to put it. Like I used to actively hate on vinyl because I I think that there's like this idea that it's somehow magical and it sounds better than everything, but it doesn't. But I think more than that, it is just that like they make really cool objects. I would love to have the album art at that scale. I would love to
Yeah.
have the physical object. But again, yeah, it's expensive. It takes up a lot of space, you know, and it's just not a thing I can do. Like I spend enough money right now on like books, like art books and comic books and like movies. You know, I still buy Blu-rays and stuff, and I think that it's just, you know, I can't have another one. I can't dive into vinyl, you know, but more power to those people, because I think those are the people that still say, hey, I'm going to put a record on and listen to it. And that's what I'm going to do. It's not just like, oh, I'll throw some music on, whatever it is. I don't care. They're just like, no, man, we're going to listen to Dark Side of the Moon on vinyl today. Like, that's what we're doing.
Okay.
And I think that's really cool. I wish, you know, I wish that, you know, when you turn on Spotify by default, people aren't as invested in the listening process.
Yeah, that's definitely something I'm trying to figure out how to recreate, not with vinyl, about just taking an album and saying, here's what it is, and even if I'm not really digging this song, I'm gonna sit through it and listen to the next one and the next one to get this experience. But it's a lot more difficult when the skip button is like, you know, right next to your finger, and you're like,
right,
click, click, click.
right.
So, you know, I'm trying to devise a plan. You know, I don't just hit play on something and then throw my phone into the ocean in a bag or something. So I don't. Also, my Bluetooth reaches. But anyway,
it helps. Like it when I put something on when I'm drawing, it's pretty easy for me to just let it go, and so that's the best time for me to try a new album out. Is just, you know, when I know I'm going to be just engrossed in something and just kind of letting it play out. And before I know it, I've listened to 5 albums in a row, and that's kind of cool. And I think now I listen to more full albums than I used to. I think I used to make mixes and stuff, and you know, when I was commuting, I would always have a mix of things I would listen to while I was commuting. But now I would rather just listen to a whole album, you know, front to back. I don't know if that's a personal thing or a product of the kind of things we've been talking about.
I think it's definitely a little both. I would definitely say, you know, a reaction to the shuffle culture. I don't know, that's so stupid. You know, just the experience of just shuffling music because you can, because we grew up making mixtapes, putting these playlists together, but there was a lot more stake at it because this was a tape or a CD burning, you know, and once you did it, it was done. And if you did it on a tape multiple times, it would just degrade and sound like crap. But you know, my wife still has mixtapes I made her, or mixed CDs, you know, when burners finally became more, you know, prevalent. So I think for people like us, we're like rediscovering this idea of just sitting down and choosing to have this one thing on and experiencing it, even if we are doing something else. And I think with the younger people who maybe have not had that, they're kind of discovering like, oh, this is pretty cool. Like, you know, so I'm all for the vinyl craze in that if it makes us just sit down and just listen to music, because the way life has evolved, you know, we're always working, we're always hustling, we're always doing the next thing, and everyone is just slowly collapsing within on themselves, and you kind of need to stop. And if it's just to take half an hour to listen to this album full without, you know, skipping, checking Twitter, skipping, checking Twitter. Oh, here's a song I like, you know, and just
anything that makes people pause.
And diffuse that cycle of just going around and around and around and around. So
well, and I think that you know, for me too, it's been helpful, like because even though like sitting down and just listening to music is good, like I was saying for my metal pieces, but also just for anything, there is certain kinds of music that'll put me in a nice mood for inking or for sketching, or, you know, and so it's like serving another purpose to have an album with an arc to it. You know, it kind of helps me to have an arc to the workday or to the drawing that I'm working on or whatever. You know, so like if I'm really dragging that day, it's nice to throw on some, you know, some Megadeth and just kind of be like, okay, you know, like, let's go. But where I'm inking and I'm in the zone, I would rather just put on some, you know, some black metal and just kind of let it kind of trudge through. And so I can just get into it, you know?
Nice. Yeah, I find that actually a lot of synthwave. I don't know if you've gotten into that.
Oh
that
yeah,
while
John Carpenter, man.
yeah, that while inking has been like it's just kind of like a extra little bit of dopamine on your brain while you're inking.
Yeah,
Especially for someone for
yeah,
me who I'm very heavy-handed, so it just kind of like is pretty mellow, even when it's a heavier or fast-pacing like Dance with the Dead or there's this great metal synth band called Master Boot Record, which I suggest you check out too because they're really
oh,
it's
write
like
that down.
it's like just old school video game heavy metal music, but it's
Okay,
just really well done. He's put out a lot of albums, so a lot of it's just kind of samey almost.
okay.
But I mean, there's still it's just still good stuff to have on to kind of like get your brain lost a little bit.
I love stuff like that, and the synth stuff has been definitely growing on me. And my in for that was movie soundtracks and
Yeah,
John Carpenter and stuff.
exactly.
But any of that stuff is just you know, yeah, it is. It's like a soundtrack for your creativity. It's like
Yeah,
really, there's nothing to pull you out of the process. It's nice.
awesome. So, with Eris going on back to comics, with Eris going on
Yeah.
Patreon, is there anything else that you've been working on that is coming up in the year? Um, this episode will be coming out at the end of February. So, if there's anything you want to talk about, promote, or
Yeah.
coming up, I know you had something possibly coming up soon.
Mm. I've got a few things kind of going on. A couple things I can't talk about. They're just kind of work for hire gigs that could lead to an
Hmm.
announcement. They could not, pitches and whatnot. Um, uh, so one thing is that I am planning to probably release Eris, online, not behind a paywall. Once I have a lot of it together. I mean, it's still going to go on Patreon first. Patrons have
Yeah,
already gotten the first 10 pages, so and they're going to continue to get pages. And so I think that that will be something that I'm going to maybe open up the door on a little bit, depending on my publishing plan for it. The other thing that I just wrapped up was the Nexus portfolio, which I'm going to eventually put those on my website for sale if anybody missed that. It's a portfolio of 12 different illustrators exploring a similar theme of echo chambers. And then the other thing in February actually is I'm going to be doing a speculative relationships sale. So I'm going to make the second and third volumes for sale at a huge discounted price. So if anybody hasn't gotten those before, they can get their hands on volumes 2 and 3, and then a PDF of volume 1 because all the physical copies are actually gone. And those are, I obviously am biased, but I'm very proud of them. Not only do I think all the work inside of them is good, we're talking over 200 pages of comics, but it features a lot of creators that are, up and coming or have
yes,
already arrived. And when I had them in the book, they were kind of early. So if you want to see, the first ever printed Danny Warren Johnson story, we got it. If you want to see the first, one of the earliest Grim Wilkins stories, we got it. If you want to see Ezra Clayton Daniels and Ben Passmore working together, we got that first time they ever worked together. We got Liam Cobb in there. We got just, it's full of just people that I think are really exciting creators, and it's all in one place. So that sale will be going on right around Valentine's Day is the idea. So it'll be
okay,
sort of a romance sci-fi sale on Valentine's Day. So stay tuned for that.
okay.
Um,
And will
and
that be
then I'll
going
be,
on throughout all of February? Sorry.
it'll be the beginning of February till like a few days after the 14th. So,
Okay.
so I'm not sure when this comes out, but I
It'll
think
probably
last
be
is
after the sale, but I'll make sure
okay.
we, spread the love.
I'm sure I will be posting about it ad nauseum.
Yeah.
And then after February, I will be at some conventions, so people can come out for that. So number one, you can always, not always, I guess. By the time this comes out, I may or may not have space left on my commission list. If I do, I would love to do a commission for anybody listening. But I will be at C2E2 in March, which is the Chicago Comics Entertainment whatever it's called.
Entertainment
And then
Expo.
I will and then I will also be at Emerald City Comic Con in Seattle. And then I'll be at Chicago Zine Fest in May here in Chicago, and then I'll be at Cake in the summer, but that's a little further off. So, so yeah, definitely hope that people can come out to shows, and I will have some new things at the shows. I'll probably have a new sketchbook out for C2E2, and I will also have the Doom drawing you alluded to earlier. I'm going to
Yeah.
have some prints of that made up,
Awesome.
probably color prints when I finish coloring it. I've been working on it for like 3 days, and then I'll probably have some black and white prints if people want to color it themselves as well.
Awesome.
So new sketchbook, that, and then for some of the smaller shows, I am debating printing up my last Inktober for that very, very small print run.
And
So
I must say that that last Inktober, you're dipping your toes into the autobiography thing was beautiful, and I highly
thanks.
recommend you know if you do print it, you know that people go check this out. I recommend that people just buy whatever Tyrell does anyway. They will not be
Well, thanks.
disappointed. Um, and so with that, I believe we can come to a close. So Tyrell, thank you very much for coming on. Appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure, man. I really, anytime you want to talk metal, I'm up for it, and definitely excited to see what you have coming out next, music and comics.
Yeah, well, you know we're both cranking at it, so we got a big 2019 coming up.
Yes, it's gonna be the year, man.
All right, thanks again, Tyrell.